Notre Dame football is defined by its storied tradition, and few people have been able to witness it up close like Tim Prister, and Tim and I relive it all on today's edition of Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, and welcome into Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. And today is Tuesday, July 30th. And thank you for making this your first listen of the day. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I'm a Notre Dame alum and producer at Fox Sports. And this show is free and available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. If you are watching along on YouTube and you like what you see, please like the video below and subscribe to the channel. Or if you're on the go and you're listening to the podcast, please rate the show 5 stars, leave a review, and of course, subscribe. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. As for today, we have part 2 of my interview with Tim Prister, senior editor of Irish Illustrated. I released part 1 of the interview on Monday, in case you missed that. That portion was focused mostly on this year's Notre Dame team and the current state of the football program, which was overwhelmingly positive, by the way. And if you weren't excited about this season already, I promise you'll be even more excited once you hear Tim's thoughts. But in the second half of our conversation, today's portion of the interview, we spent a lot of time looking back on Tim's 40-plus years on the Notre Dame football beat and his favorite memories during that time. As you know, there have been a lot of highs and a lot of lows during that time span, and Tim had a front row seat to it all. So it was incredible to hear his stories and his perspective on the history of Notre Dame football. This was one of my favorite interviews that I've done in my entire career, and I hope you find it as enjoyable as I did. Real quick, though, before we get to the interview, I wanted to mention that I am taking questions for this week's mailbag episode that's going to go out on Friday, the Irish kickoff camp tomorrow morning, and I want to hear what your biggest questions are about this team as the 2024 season kicks off. You can submit your question in the YouTube comments, or you can send them in on Twitter at Locked On Irish or on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod. Okay, let's bring in Tim Prister. All right, let's shift gears now to part 2 of this interview, and I want to take a stroll down memory lane with you, and it might be quite a long stroll because you have been watching this team closely for a very long time. We talked about this before we started recording. You have been to over 479 Notre Dame games in person. I feel pretty confident that is more than pretty much anybody who has ever lived. So I want to ask you this. I was actually just asked this question last week by someone, and I'm so excited to hear your answer. What era was the peak of Notre Dame football?
Since I've
no. Throughout the history. For now, we'll cover the entire history, and then we'll focus on.
All right. Well, I won't go back any further than Parsegian because I don't remember before Parsegian. And Parsegian came in and came from Northwestern and completely turned the program around. They were awful prior to that. Now, I'm always careful to say this because, my respect for Eric Parsegian was immense. I actually met him when I was 8 years old, but I got to know him when I was after he had got done coaching, and I got to visit with him. But his schedules were really, really easy. If you go back and look at the records of the opponents that they played, he only beat USC a couple times. And those were years when they won the national title. So he had a great record. He was a great coach. He was innovative, but the schedules weren't nearly as difficult as they were in the following years. Not his fault. They played the teams. They pretty much played the teams that they always played through the years, and they just weren't good, during those times. But he beat Alabama in a national championship, and he went to Michigan State when they were great and tied them when nobody thought they would be able to do that. So I'm partial to Eric Parsegian, but for me, the Holtz era from 1988 to 1993, 6 seasons, that was the golden years of my life. Now, Notre Dame won national titles when I was 6, 13, and 17. The first 2 were Parsegian. I was a senior in high school when Dan Devine won the national title. When I was at Notre Dame, Devine was the head coach for a while, and then it was Jerry Faust, and those weren't very good years. But I got to know Dan Devine very well. He was a great coach, but not very charismatic many times. Lou Holtz was just an absolute football genius. There's no other way to describe him. His motivational ability. I coached high school baseball. I pretty much coached high school baseball similar to the way Lou Holtz coached. That I had my thumb on my players the whole time, because I was always scared if I let up that they would get complacent, because that's what teenagers do. So I didn't let up on them. And trust me when I tell you that Lou Holtz never let up on his players, except during the season. He would build up to game week. You'll hear former players talk about this now. By the time they put the uniform on game day, they felt invincible. And I can vouch for that, still knowing a lot of the guys from the 88 national championship team. That group was the most confident, self-assured, punishing ass kickers I've ever been around a football team. Wes Pritchett, Frank Stamms, Michael Stonebreaker, Chris Zorich, great secondary. I mean, there were great players throughout that defense in particular. And then offensively, Holtz, everything was about winning at the point of attack. They didn't throw the football that much. They get Rick Meyer in here. Rick Meyer's running option. Everybody ran a little bit of option. I'm not sure how well that would have worked with Ron Paulus. He never, he obviously wasn't a running quarterback. But anyway, Holtz was an absolute motivational genius, and really was a big reason why I played baseball at Notre Dame. A big reason why I said, you know what, I want to go back to my alma mater and coach baseball. And he was a huge motivation for me deciding to do that.
Growing up, I would hear stories about Lou Holtz and his teams all the time from my dad and my uncle, who both grew up Notre Dame fans. And that was sort of like their most formative years when he was around the program. And I think that the fan base holds Lou and his teams in such high regard still, and they yearn for that era of Notre Dame football to come back. What was it about Lou, his teams, his style of play that continue to make it so special all these years later, outside of the fact that, yes, he's the last coach to win a national championship? Because I think it's so much more than just that.
They always came ready to play. I mean, it seemed like, obviously he lost. And
I was going to say, I was not alive during this era, but when I've gone back, I have been shocked at some of the losses that happened under the Lou Holtz era. The one at the Stanford game comes to mind. Like, they would beat the best teams in the country, but they would occasionally lose a game where you're like I look back at it now, I'm like, how did that happen? Like Boston College.
Yeah, well, like Boston College, but keep in mind that Tom Coughlin was coaching that Boston College team, and he was an absolutely great coach. Yeah, what coach doesn't have losses where he regrets, and there's no doubt. I mean, they blew a game against Tennessee in the 90s when they were, that was 92, I want to say, when they should have been playing for the national title in 92. But, there are other great teams out there, and they have great coaches as well. But, they weren't ready to play 100% every game, but most of the time they were. And a lot of that was he knew about the rhythm and the tempo of coaching a team. He knew when he needed to put his thumb down on his team and when he had to build them up. And, we're talking about, Tyler, time. Nobody does 2-a-days now. I mean, we're talking about 2-a-day practices when he would beat them to a pulp. And then the other thing was his ability with Vinny Serrato as recruiting coordinator to bring in talent. Notre Dame got a little lenient with some academically with some players. Tony Rice, John Foley was a name that never fully emerged. Chris Zorich came from CVS High School in Chicago that certainly didn't project in Notre Dame. So they allowed him some advantages, but he was still recruiting on the highest level, particularly in the Catholic schools, which as a whole have dipped back from what they once were. Notre Dame used to go crazy recruiting in the Chicagoland and the Catholic high schools, but it was all about physicality, being tougher than everybody else. He had the ultimate warrior in Joe Moore as his offensive line coach, who we could devote an entire show to guy that was just
Yeah.
absolutely incredible and relentless with his offensive lineman. It was a different era. Nobody plays football like they played football back then. This was about today. Everything is about matchups and tons of offense and formations and motion. Lou Holtz got the best offensive and defensive linemen in the country. When they lined up on offense, they were going to kick your butt. And with Joe Moore as our offensive line coach, that's exactly what they did most of the time.
And those two qualities, having the best offensive line and defensive line, are still the most important thing in football. No matter how much the game has changed, there's a reason why Georgia and some of those SEC teams like Alabama have been at the top of college football. It's because they play great offensive line and great defensive line as well. And I also don't want to sound like critical of Lou Holtz. It's just funny being from the outside and looking back at some of those teams, like the 1990 team, for example. They had that loss to Stanford that I mentioned. They lost to Penn State that year, and then they got screwed by the refs there against Colorado in the Orange Bowl. But still, just a different time. Beyond just the football team, what did Lou Holtz mean to the University of Notre Dame?
Well, I mean, you want to talk about a guy that truly loved and embraced Notre Dame. He and I had a conversation last summer, and he talked about, and I'd heard this story, but I was working on a project, and what I knew he loved Notre Dame. Why'd you love Notre Dame? Well, he went to a Catholic grade school, and they'd play the victory march when they went out to recess or whatever. He loved Notre Dame. Johnny Lujack, for a name from the 40s when Notre Dame went undefeated with a couple ties over the course of 4 seasons. He loved Notre Dame. He went to a Catholic grade school. Everybody that around him loved Notre Dame. And so he embraced. Now, he'll tell you that he didn't fight the rules at Notre Dame. I think that would be a bit of a stretch because he was so competitive as a football coach. But by and large, he understood. He came into Notre Dame understanding that this is going to be more difficult than it is at most places. And for the most part, he bought into everything that Notre Dame represented. And that meant, outside of some exceptions, as I mentioned, that these guys had to be true student athletes, and they were. But his love for Notre Dame, and then the other thing was his great relationship with Dick Rosenthal, who recently passed. I was really close with the Rosenthal family. Loved Dick Rosenthal, respected him. I was actually best man in his son's wedding when he was a freshman at Notre Dame, and I was a senior at Mishawaka Marian High School. And after his wedding, I got on a bus and played a high school basketball game in Michigan City, Indiana. But his relationship with Dick Rosenthal was they truly loved each other, and that had a lot to do with it too. Rosenthal had his back. And, that 6-year stretch from 88 through 93, yeah, they may have lost a couple of games that they shouldn't have. I would agree with you, but they were a machine during that time.
They absolutely were. And when I was asked that question, what do you think is the peak of Notre Dame football? I said, I think it's going to depend on the age of the person you're asking. If you're asking people who are my dad's age or your age, they're going to say the Lou Holtz era. If you were to ask my grandpa if he were still alive, he would say probably Parsegian, maybe even Frank Leahy, but I think that's sort of the beauty of it. Now, you graduated in 1982, so when you were covering that team, you were just a few years removed from college. So what was your personal relationship like with Lou Holtz, considering you were closer in age to his players than him?
Yeah, that's a great question. And my relationship with the players was great because I was so close in age, and that's why I'm still friends with Stams and Pritchett and Rice and guys like that, because we were close in age. But it could be contentious at times. There's no doubt about that. It was more contentious with Jerry Faust, who didn't like the negative letters to the editor that we were publishing in Blue and Gold Illustrated. I'm like, Jerry, what do you want me to do? It's freedom of the press. It's freedom of speech. It's letters to the editor. But Holtz and I had our confrontations. I can actually remember when his son Skip, who played for him, I saw him play for under Lou, and then he coached for him. He would many times be the guy that would take me on as opposed to Lou, kind of as the go-between. But by and large, very good, because I think, number one, okay. I mean, I get my love for Notre Dame and growing up in and around Notre Dame is off the chart. But I was born a journalist, so when I became a journalist, I was going to tell the truth to the best of my ability and to the way I knew it to be. And so I've always wanted Notre Dame to win the games, but I'm a journalist first, and so sometimes there were times where you had to tell it like it is, and when you didn't think that they were living up to their full potential, you said it. Holtz didn't pay a whole lot of attention to what I wrote and what I said, but some people might remind him of some of the things I wrote and said if he didn't see it. So there were times, but it was really few and far between. It really was, because he knew my heart was in the right place. He knew I wanted to be really good and genuine at my job. And I think he also understood that this was my life and I was going to spend my whole life doing this, and that I was going to work every bit as hard as at my job as he was going to work at his. So to this day, we have a really, really strong, we don't talk very often, but we still have a really strong bond. And I think I don't think I'm speaking out of line when I say a great respect for one another.
Yeah, he might not always agree with you, but he certainly did respect you. And that is one of the funnier things that I've learned since I started working in sports media, like right out of college, is growing up, you hear all these athletes and coaches say, oh, I don't pay attention to what's said in the press or in the newspaper or on podcasts or anything like that. That is a blatant lie. They know. They know what people are saying about them.
Tyler, it was easier not to pay attention then because you didn't have social media.
Sure.
So it was a lot easier. Not now. I don't know how a player doesn't know what's being said, although many times, and it comes across as genuine, some players will just say, they're in the football cocoon. They don't know what's going on.
Do you have a favorite Lou Holtz story, or maybe the worst ass chewing you got from him?
Okay. Yeah, I got an ass chewing from him in his office once, but those are really.
What did you say? Do you remember? Like what caused it is actually a better way to ask that.
I just think just pressing him. Well, why did what? Well, what about that and this and that? Just being a pain in the ass myself. And I love. I'll get to your question, but I loved it. I would call his secretary up and say, "Hey, can I get together with Lou?" Yeah, come on in. I mean, it's not that simple now, but you would sit at his desk and he would open his drawer and he'd pull out this massive baggie of pipes. He smoked a pipe. And he'd go through each one. No, I don't want to smoke that one today. I remember it as a bag of like 25 pipes. And he would choose it, and you could smoke. I used to smoke cigars in press boxes until I went to an Orange Bowl and somebody said, "What are you doing?" So I'm smoking a cigar. Oh, you can't smoke anymore. That was the late 80s. You could do it up until then. But just him picking through, I always remember that. And then him lighting it up. And I could, if I wanted an hour and a half, I would get that amount of time. But my favorite story about him is one that the players, numerous players have told me through the years. If a kid was struggling, he would call him into his office. And it was always a really talented player. He'd call him into his office and say, "Son, I just don't think it's going to work out for you here at University of Notre Dame." So he would say, "Just tell me where you want to go and play football. I'll call up Bobby Bowden or Joe Paterno or whoever you want, and I'll say, hey, this is a really good kid. I think he'll do better for you than he does for me." And most players would be like, "Coach, wait, I don't want to transfer. I'm happy here." But as years went by, I must have had 6, 7, 8, 10 guys tell me the exact same story happened to them. So it was a pretty good shtick that he had going with guys. And most of the time it scared the crap out of them. And it ended up being players. Pete Kriplevich was a tight end. I know he was one of the guys that told me this story. It wasn't a marginal player. It was always somebody that was good. And eventually the great coaching and the great atmosphere that they played in would kick in, and they'd end up being a pretty damn good football player.
We'll be right back with Tim to reflect on the rather tumultuous tenures of Charlie Weis and Brian Kelly. But first, I want to tell you about a great opportunity, courtesy of our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. I love sports. I love them so much that I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sportsing quite like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All you have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Okay, so here's my pick. You want an Olympics bet? Right now, you can bet on U.S. track and field star Noah Lyles to win gold in the 100-meter and the 200-meter for plus 160 right now on FanDuel. Those are pretty good odds. I know he's the favorite, but I think I'm going to take that. Let me know what you think, and head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Okay, we've talked a lot about Holtz. There's a couple other coaches I want to ask you about, and you might get a kick out of this because when I was a kid, I looked at Brady Quinn, Jeff Samardzija, and Tom Zbikowski, and those teams like they were legitimate superheroes. Now, granted, I was 9 years old when they played, but I was already so bought in to Notre Dame football, and those were really like the first good teams that I was able to watch as a fan of this team. But it's funny now because you look back on the 05 and 06 teams and the seasons that they had, you compare it to some of the teams that Notre Dame has had in recent years, like they weren't even as close to as good as some of the teams like in the Brian Kelly era. You wrote a book about Charlie Weis after that first year. I know you were very close with him and the team. Now that you have the benefit of hindsight, how do you look back on those first 2 years specifically of the Charlie Weis era?
Well, it's interesting. I had a conversation with Mike Denbrock about, he was on the staff when Tyrone Willingham was fired. And I said, well, the perception was that Tyrone Willingham they weren't recruiting well enough. And that was definitely my perception. Even now, if I go back and look at those recruiting classes, he didn't recruit well enough. Anyway, so I said that to Denbrock, and Denbrock said, well, it was good enough to win, 19 games in the first 2 years of the Charlie Weis era. And that was a good point because of Brady Quinn, Jeff Samardzija, Tom Zbikowski, and others. So there were Weis certainly inherited building blocks from Tyrone Willingham, but then couldn't keep that process going. By the time they got to 2007, the third year, they were awful at quarterback. They brought in Jimmy Clausen, but he wasn't. The offensive line was awful. He was getting his butt kicked. He wasn't strong enough yet, to evade pass rushes because he was fairly nimble, but although he was still a drop back quarterback. But I don't think that he quite knew how to build a roster. And that he was never able to put it together the last 3 years. Plus, Charlie Weis wasn't the easiest guy in the world to get along with. I think I got along with him great. There are two reasons why I got along with him great. Number one, I graduated from Notre Dame. And was a student athlete. And number two, I got into coaching at that point. I went back to my high school and started coaching. So I think he saw the Notre Dame thing and somebody, not that I had any concept of what it was like to coach on this level, but I think those were two things that led to a good relationship with him. He actually offered me a job prior to his fifth year, and it didn't quite work out. And if I would have been accepted in the athletic department in 2009, Jack Swarbrick probably would have fired me right after he fired Charlie Weis. So I don't know, but Weis, the chemistry, although he was a graduate of the school, the chemistry with Notre Dame wasn't really even close to what the chemistry that Lou Holtz had with Dick Rosenthal, et cetera.
Yeah, I get that. And I think those first 2 years were so fun because it had just been so long since Notre Dame was really relevant in the national space. Now, I want to ask you about Brian Kelly. He is a very divisive figure in the Notre Dame fan base, which I understand to a degree, but I'm going to be honest with you. I don't hate him at all. I have an appreciation for everything he did for the football program and how he turned it around. I also, didn't love the way he left, but that's okay. I think both things can be true. Although I think by saying that, I'm going to have some comments from some people who are pissed off that I said anything nice about Brian Kelly. How do you look back on him and his tenure at Notre Dame?
Well, first of all, he handed Marcus Freeman a program. He put on silver platter and said, here's a 54-win program in 5 years. Have at it.
And he hired Marcus Freeman. People
and he
have
hired,
a tendency to forget
him as
about that.
Coordinator right before that. So if you want to give any credit to Brian Kelly, I don't know how you can't be appreciative of the fact that he handed Marcus Freeman a great football program, at least an upper echelon program when he did that. The way he departed, nobody's ever going to forgive him of that. I fully understand that. I was just talking to my brother. My brother's 5 years older than me, so we grew up during that whole Parsegian era. And he's the first one to say Brian Kelly had 3 undefeated regular seasons. I mean, those are so rare at Notre Dame through the years that we have a greater appreciation for that. But I realize that, college football and fandom it's national title or bust. I think we looked at it a lot differently. I know that I looked at it a lot differently because I grew up in South Bend, Indiana, and this is what I always say. It's easy for me to say this because they won national titles when I was 6, 13, and 17. But if you grew up here during that era, you truly had a great appreciation for the student athlete at Notre Dame and how difficult it was for Notre Dame to win football games. So you appreciated that. You respected that. I don't think people care too much about what Notre Dame's cumulative GPA is among football players. But that was a real thing. That was a real thing then. And so our perspective on that is a little bit different. 3 undefeated seasons in a 12-year span, it was an incredible accomplishment by Brian Kelly. But he didn't work as hard at recruiting as you need to in this era. He did know how to put teams together. There were a lot of times where they would win games against teams that you thought they should beat the crap out of. And it's like, no, they won again. I mean, they won 30 straight games against ACC teams. People would say to me, well, all he does is beat the teams that he should beat. Well, that's not what Marcus Freeman did against Marshall and Stanford in 2022. I don't know if you would say they should have beaten Louisville and Clemson, but Clemson, if you remember that game, they were totally beat up. I think Notre Dame was a favorite in that game, but Clemson is what it is. I don't have any negative feelings about Brian Kelly. As I always say, us in the business, we all have a working business relationship with the head football coach at Notre Dame. Marcus Freeman is the 7th that I've covered. I don't include George O'Leary because I never actually spoke to him one-on-one.
We got to do another podcast about that whole saga. I am so interested in that because I was young. I don't really remember it at all, but sorry, I cut you off.
Look, Brian Kelly was a very, very good coach. He wasn't a great coach. Okay. And I get that. And I realize, I understand why Notre Dame fans don't like him. They're mad at him. They hate him. I understand all of that. But like I said, we in the media had a business relationship with him. And it was pretty good. Now I probably had more Brian Kelly had more blow-ups with me than Lou Holtz did, believe it or not. Most of those came early. One of them came after the fake field goal by Michigan State that led to the game-winning touchdown.
What'd you say?
Well, pardon me?
What did you say that got him so riled up?
I just asked, I don't know. I just asked him a question about why it happened. I try not to be accusatory, but I try to ask questions as to why did it happen? Well, during tough times that can be. At Arizona State, I did make the mistake of saying that you came out flat. And they really did because they didn't compete after the opening series.
They couldn't hold the field goal.
Yeah,
was
but,
just a
coming
terrible
to
day.
San Diego coach, he came out flat. That was probably, so he jumped on me there. But Brian Kelly was from a media standpoint was good to deal with. Didn't give us a lot of access to the players and assistant coaches, whereas Marcus Freeman and his staff, it's almost unlimited. We don't get a ton of preseason practices to observe, but Brian Kelly's a very, very good coach. Notre Dame fans should be thankful that he came along and finally started winning some games. They weren't playing good football or any kind of consistent football prior to that. By his third year, he was undefeated playing Alabama. They were outmatched. I don't know. I think we all have different perspectives. I certainly understand why a segment of the fans don't like him. I got along with him pretty well for what it's worth.
Yeah, I totally understand why fans don't like him. I just think that because the way he left, a lot of people forgot all the
No
success
doubt.
that he had as a coach, and that's just the way it is.
Yeah, I was standing in the darkness outside of the Goog when he drove away for the last time, and it. He wanted more progress on the facility that they're now working on, which won't be done for a couple more years. He had asked about that. They didn't make progress on it. He saw an opportunity at LSU that was I guess, quote, easier to win. I'm not sure they're going to win 10 games this year, frankly. So I'm not sure it's going to be easier. But anyway, it is what it is. But I look at, like, thankfully a quality coach came along and was able to string together some success.
Absolutely. He did not reach the ceiling. I think that's fair to say. And he did a lot of good things, but it ran its course. Tim and I still have plenty more to get to, including his retelling of the most captivating moments of his entire career. But first, I want to tell you about our new sponsor, Ibotta. It's summertime, which means it's barbecue season. You could stock up on all of your grilling favorites and earn cash back on every purchase when you use Ibotta. So you won't have to choose between burgers or hot dogs. You can get both. Ibotta is a free app that lets you earn cash back every time you shop. You can earn on hundreds of items, from groceries to beauty supplies, even toys, so you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what it is that you're purchasing. The average Ibotta user earns $256 per year. That could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip, that flight you've been eyeing, or the fancy dinner that you've been craving. Other apps give you points that don't really amount to much, but with Ibotta, you earn cash back that you can withdraw to your bank account, PayPal, or gift cards. Simply add offers in the app, upload your receipt, and voila, the money is yours. You can save on over 2,400 brands and shop at over 1,000 retailers, including your favorite grocery stores, Lowe's, Macy's, Sephora, Best Buy, and more. It's time you joined the over 50 million users who use Ibotta to earn cash back every time they shop. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying Ibotta by using the code LOCKEDONCollege when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app to start earning cash back and use code LOCKEDONCollege. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store and use code LOCKEDONCollege. Today's episode is also brought to you by Factor. Warmer, sunnier days are calling. Fuel up for them with Factor's no prep, no mess meals. Meet your wellness goals in time for summer thanks to the menu of chef-crafted meals with options like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are dietitian approved and ready to eat in just 2 minutes, so no matter how busy you are, you'll always have time to enjoy nutritious, great tasting meals. Make today the day you kickstart a new healthy routine. What are you waiting for? With 35 different meals and more than 60 add-ons to choose from every week, you'll always have new flavors to explore. Crush your wellness goals this July and August with dietitian-approved meals and ingredients that you can trust. Make your day delicious from breakfast to dessert. Stay fueled with easy, nutritious options. Treat yourself to restaurant-quality meals that feature premium ingredients like filet mignon, shrimp, and blackened salmon. Keep kitchen time to a minimum. Factor meals are ready in 2 minutes. No shopping, prepping, cooking, or cleaning up. Enjoy effortless supply for your lifestyle. Choose from 6 menu preferences to help you manage calories, maximize protein intake, avoid meat, or simply eat well balanced. Head to factormeals.com/LockedOnCollege50 and use code LockedOnCollege50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month. That's code LockedOnCollege50 at factormeals.com/LockedOnCollege50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month while your subscription is active. I would love to ask you more about when he left LSU and just those couple of days, but I've kept you for far too long. So I only have 5 questions. They're rapid fire. I promise I'll keep these brief.
And I promise I'll keep my answers shorter than they've been too.
Okay. So one thing I love about you is that you remain objective in your coverage about Notre Dame football without shying away from the fact that you want the team to have success. You're an alum, you grew up a fan, but you are also a journalist. But can you share with me a moment or two when the journalist in you basically went out the door? When the action on the field was so captivating that you became a fan again, even if it was just for a few moments?
Yeah, when Robinson caught what we thought was the winning touchdown pass at Florida State, but it was overruled for an offensive interference pick. There is a picture of me. Pete Sampson has always given me the business about this. I didn't say anything. I didn't smile. I didn't react. But when Corey Robinson scored what we thought was the game-winning touchdown against Florida State, I simply raised my hands in a touchdown signal like the official, and it was taken off the board. That was one instance. I was a very young reporter when I was one of like 8 people in a room when Jerry Faust said he was going to resign after the Miami game. The University of Notre Dame had no idea that was happening. There were no cameras in it like there are, no video. It was just 8 guys and some guys from out of town that were there. I was one of them that when he said he was going to resign or he's resigning after the next game. There was a writer from Philadelphia. I don't remember his name. And as soon as Faust made this is a quick hit. This is a quick hit, huh?
Hey, just keep going. Hey, I love this.
Doing a really good job. Anyway, he starts grilling Faust. Well, I'm a 20-something-year-old reporter and who's kind of always felt bad about Jerry Faust, at least other than when he threw a newspaper at me because I was printing letters that were negative. And I kind of muttered out loud, like, give the guy a break. And this dude afterwards just absolutely undressed me about being unprofessional and a sycophant and a Notre Dame fan. And he was just doing his job. But I thought poor Jerry was getting drilled a little bit too much. So I was a little bit outspoken there as a young reporter. But those are a couple moments.
I asked O'Malley this exact same question a while back. It was actually right after the game. And he said that Ohio State, Notre Dame.
Ohio State was devastating. The Ohio State loss last year was definitely the most devastating since Boston College 93. They should have won that game. They could have won that game. We know some of the reasons why they didn't, which is what makes it that much more painful. The Ohio State game last year, the fan in me, I took that one really, really hard.
I was in the end zone on that side, and I just was numb. I'm surprised you didn't say the Rocket, his punt return getting called back in 1990.
Well, that would be on the list. The interesting thing there was I was on the sideline, lined up straight from him. He was at about the 10. It was a 91-yard. And he caught the punt. The penalty that was called was on the far side of the field, so I didn't really see it live. But what I did see was Rocket, who is still the fastest player that's ever worn a Notre Dame uniform, turn the corner and work his way up the sideline. And I remember this was pre-wave days, but the crowd reacted like a wave as Rocket was working his way down the sideline. I'm not sure where I saw or when I saw the flag, but when he turned the corner, that image of the fans rising in a wave as he quickly went down the sideline was amazing. That was a tough one. But there wasn't as much on there was a lot on the line that day. I don't know. I
was going to say the national
I look at that one just a little bit differently than the other two. I'm sorry for rambling on here.
No. I love it. That actually leads me to my next question. Who are the most exciting Notre Dame football players that you covered? Not necessarily the best, but just the ones that kind of made you watch in awe.
Rocket, Ragib, I should say. I always try to call him Ragib because everybody else called him Rocket. He stands out. Tony Rice was a 48% passer, but man, could he run an option offense. And Holtz knew that. Chris Zorich, the way he played the game, one of my favorite players of all time. Bryant Young is one of the most distinguished human beings I've ever known. I absolutely love Bryant Young and everything they stood for, and he represents Notre Dame in such a great way. Frank Stam's it's probably one of the guys I'm closest to, dominant last year at Notre Dame. I as you can see, I'm mentioning a lot of the older guys because the glory years were the Holtz years from '88 to '93. Those are the first guys that pop in my mind.
Yeah, I think for me it's Golden Tate, but those teams are finishing 6-6,
Golden
so it
Tate,
wasn't
yeah.
quite as exciting when you're just trying to beat, like, I don't know, a Washington team that wasn't even that good.
Golden Tate's winning jump balls against Washington State in San Antonio. It's him and 4 or 5 other defenders, and he wins the jump ball. He was spectacular.
Okay, favorite road college stadium that you've been to for a Notre Dame game?
Georgia,
man. I was at that. That was
I
something
mean,
else.
I've told this. I'll be quick. As a kid, you always heard about Between the Hedges. I always wanted to go to Between the Hedges. Didn't get the opportunity until a couple of years later. The fans are organized. Their cheers are organized. They're in the stadium 2 hours before kickoff. Everything they do is just totally committed to the cause. The other one I would mention would be the '89 Orange Bowl, in the Orange Bowl facility against Miami. The most vile, awful, horrible group of people that I've ever been around. Was Notre Dame had won 23 straight games. They had beaten them at Notre Dame last year in somewhat controversial fashion. The most vile, vicious place I've ever been in my life.
That is exactly what I've heard from all my friends who went to the game back in 2017. So it's funny that you say that. Okay, 2 more. I heard from a mutual friend in the Notre Dame media space that you are no longer allowed to book hotels for the group after the latest trip to Tallahassee. Would you like to elaborate on what happened there?
I would. We were having difficulty getting a hotel room in Tallahassee, and I found did O'Malley say what it is? Was it a Comfort Inn?
It wasn't O'Malley, but it was a Quality Inn.
Okay, Quality Inn. Okay, thank you. All right, so our group was having trouble getting them. I said, "Hey, man, I found this. You're interested? It's reasonable." It was the worst. What can I say? It was. I won't get into all the details, but it was. You felt like you were the bed bugs were going to attack you at any point during the night. It was absolutely awful.
Yeah, I was told that people seriously contemplated if it made more sense to just sleep in the car.
I would agree.
That is pretty bad. Okay, yeah. Last one. What was there a moment, or if you could think back, what made you fall in love with Notre Dame football as a kid?
Oh man, geez, I get emotional thinking about that. You know, the parish priest at St. Mary the Assumption that took us to the first football game I ever went to. My brother, my father, and myself in the rectory of that parish priest, watching the 10-10 tie with Michigan State, meeting Ara Parseghian and all the coaches when I was 8 years old, meeting Joe Yanto and Brian Bullock, George Kelly when I was 8, and then 15 years later, walking into their office and covering them. And then again, what Notre Dame meant to us. It truly meant my religion. It meant what I believed in academically, athletically. How could you not love the University of Notre Dame?
That is a perfect note to end it on. Tim, that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. I've taken up far too much of your time. I can't tell you how much I appreciate this. I look forward to reading and listening to your coverage all season long, and I hope to see you around soon. Thanks again, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Tyler. Appreciate it.
That's a wrap for this episode. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On College Football podcast. Spencer McLaughlin does a great job covering the sport from a national perspective. I've been on the show a few times myself, and I encourage you to check it out. I'm going to be back tomorrow morning with friend of the program, Greg Flamong from Irish Sports Daily, to kick off the start of training camp with a big preview episode, bold predictions, ton of fun stuff coming your way, so you're going to want to check that out tomorrow morning. Also, please subscribe to the show on YouTube or wherever you're listening to the podcast, and I'll see you tomorrow.